We loaded? Ooh, we are. He silences a room just by walking into it, Terry. Welcome to Tulare County Voices at 210. We are at 210. My name is Paul Hurley, and don't worry if you can't remember that because I'll repeat it later. But for now, what I'd like to do is introduce the pastor of First Presbyterian Church, Pastor Dan Birchfield.
Thank you, Paul. And I welcome you all to Tulare County Voices at 210. This 210 building, in case you didn't know, belongs to First Presbyterian Church. And since it opened up back around 2008, there has been a forum meeting happening here on a regular basis in conjunction between First Presbyterian Church and the Visalia Times Delta, and so we are very honored that there have been wonderful forums that have happened here, and tonight is going to be another great one. Terry Ommen being here, and we are grateful and thankful that you all have shown up to be a part of this. I want to make a little explanation for you about the 210 Cafe. A lot of times if you come here for Tulare County Voices at 210, you would see a barista or two behind the coffee counter ready to serve. Well, unfortunately, the church made a very hard decision in deciding to close down the cafe operations. We have always, since it's been open, had a shortfall at the end of the year. It was easier to be covering that shortfall back around 2008 and the years immediately after that, when we were a congregation that was close to twice as large, and the giving resources were much larger. We've gotten to a place where we really felt like we couldn't continue to afford to make up the difference at the end of the year. That is not uncommon for churches that try to run coffee shop businesses. I called a number of them saying, how do your books compare to ours? And they're like, not much different. But those churches tend to be 1,000 or more members, and they tend to be able to sustain the business a little bit better because of having more surplus money. We had great baristas over the years. We had great managers. They all put their heart and their soul into what they were doing. We had great volunteer team of people that provided leadership and support and did repairs, pro bono, and so a lot of people contributed in significant ways to keep this cafe happening for the 17 years it did. What I want to get the word out about is that the mission of 210 still exists. The cafe was a component of that mission, but the real mission of having this 210 building is that it is a building that allows for the community and the church to come together for certain events that we share an interest in. And like Tulare County Voices at 210 is one of those. Cup of Jazz that happens on Saturday mornings here and has been for about a decade is continuing. And so, that's another community event that will continue on. And we still have some very small but significant groups that the last 2 weeks, even though we've been closed as a cafe, they've still been meeting here. So we had about 14 meetings happening this week. And so we have we have had some big events, and we want you to continue to let people know that 210 is still available to be rented and used for meetings and organizational events. Fun, as Paul Hurley would like to stress. You can have fun events in here, and so contact the church office whenever you're interested in using either one of the smaller rooms, the cafe area, or the assembly room, and we can let you know if it's available. And since it is Advent/Christmas season, this is a very, very special time of year, not only for our church, but also for lots of Christians throughout the community that might not even have a church home. Well, I want to tell you that every Sunday, for the most part, unless we change the schedule on a special occasion, there's a service happening in the sanctuary at 9 a.m. that's traditional with choir, organ, hymns. And then we have at 10:30 a.m. in here a contemporary service with guitars and percussion and keyboard. And so we would love for you to drop in anytime on our worship services. And in particular, we would invite you to come either the Sunday before Christmas. We'll have one service in the sanctuary at 10 a.m., and that's going to be a pull out all the stops Christmas service extraordinaire. And so would love to have you come to that. Choir, organ, contemporary songs. It's going to be a great time. And then Christmas Eve at 5 o'clock in the sanctuary, we will have a candle light service where we pass the light of the Christ candle. And so we would love to have any and all of you, whether it's just for the season or whether possibly you would think about coming in from time to time into our worship and fellowship. With that, I'm going to toss the mic. Well, I'm not going to toss it, but I'm going to hand it back to Paul Hurley, who, by the way, wrote an incredible article in the Visalia Times Delta about the 210 Cafe, and I really appreciated that. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Pastor Dan. Every time we have these forums, I make a point to thank First Presbyterian Church. We use their space here for free once a month for these forums, and we are very, very grateful for that. We've been doing it now since, well, I think you said 2008, so we have a very long-lasting fellowship, and we appreciate it. And let's have another hand for Pastor Dan and First Presbyterian Church. So there are a lot of things here at 210 that aren't going away, such as a cup of jazz and some other things. It may be a little hard to just drop in for a cup of coffee. Well, you won't find the coffee, but you will find fun and fellowship. So we hope you'll continue to remember 210. I don't think anybody here is new to this for the first time, but I'll still mention Tulare County Voices is a monthly forum co-sponsored by First Presbyterian Church and the Visalia Times Delta. We've been doing this now for 18 years, 18, make it 16. And it's devoted to an open discussion of topics of interest to the community. We welcome participation from our guests, and we hope that you will ask questions, get involved, make comments. We will have a floating mic, so if anybody wants to ask Terry some questions later, you'll be invited to do that. Coming up in January, January 14th, let's see, what's it? You probably all got a copy of the flyer. We had a few handout. And it's going to be Taming the Valley Air quality and health issues. We will have representatives from San Joaquin Valley Air Pollution Control District, City of Visalia, business people, and others on January 14th, 7 p.m. And we will continue with our forums next year in 2025 on the second Tuesday of the month. A couple of other announcements. There are flyers about the Butterfield Overland stage route. One is being held up right now. Where are they originating from? Where are they from? Okay, and Melinda, do we have our other microphone going around yet? Let's make sure that we have that available. By the way, it's a really handy brochure. Very well done, very informative, and colorful and handy, so make sure you get one. We also have over there at the table, is it cookies?
Yes, we have cookies that were donated, and the people have been very generous. We have a cup here that you can throw any excess change, a couple of dollars into, and a very good selection of cookies.
So if anybody wants some cookies, didn't get them yet, take this opportunity to go back and get yourself a cookie before we really get cooking here, okay? I have one more thing I need to do, and that is I'm going to ask all of the members of the Tulare County Voices at 210 planning team. Don't sit down, Melinda. Donna, come on up here. Catherine, you too. Brian, please. Who else is? Who?
Where's Lou?
Where's Lou? What are we saying? Where's Lou? We got everybody? Is it? Miley. Miley is in Hawaii. Can we have a collective boo for Miley Melkonian, please? Boo. Okay, our absent members are Miley Melkonian and Lou Griswold, and we're not going to boo Lou. We'll give him a big cheer if he manages to walk in that door. But these are the people who plan these forums throughout the year. We meet a couple of times a month, contact the people that will be presenting the forums, and do research, have discussions, and they do all this for free. They're all volunteer, and I'm very grateful for their help. Tulare County Voices at 210 wouldn't exist without them. Catherine Doe, Donna Kinshu, who's hiding that I can't see? Miley Melkonian, and our Melinda Morales, and our, yeah, see, I can't see her from where I am, our tech guy, the man in the booth, Brian Gerhardt. You know, if you could come out here where I could see you, this would help. Can we give them all a nice round of applause, please? The time flies. Okay, class. You're dismissed.
Remind them about the email signing up.
The email, we are continuing to compile our email database. If we don't have your email address yet, please give it to us at the desk by the door on your way out, or when you get cookies, or whatever. We will use that to notify you once or twice a month about what the forum is and other news you might need to know about Tulare County Voices at 210. Are we done making any announcements?
I think we are done making any announcements.
So right now, then, I can introduce the show that you all came here for. Terry Ommen is Visalia's preeminent historian, the man to go to for all things about local history. I've known Terry for a number of years, and he's been doing this even longer. Every December, we invite Terry to present a forum about local history. I like to think of it as our Christmas card to Visalia. A nice little program that will tell you all something that you didn't know, a little more about you that you didn't know about that community that you live in and love. And I presume you love it, or you wouldn't be here. I know that Terry does. It comes through in his presentations. And without further ado, Captain Terry Ommen.
Thank you. I usually stand before you when I do these talks, and I think age is creeping in on me. So I saw Greg Collins a couple of months ago seated at a table up here and talking, and I thought, that's what I'm going to do next. So that's why I'm at the table today. So bear with me, and I appreciate your approval of that. So I'll be seated here. I want to also kind of talk about some thank yous because this is a big deal to me, and so many people are involved in making it happen. So I'm going to do some repeating here. First of all, I want to thank all of you. So many of you are regulars that come to this history program every year, and I appreciate you all coming to that. Pastor Dan, thank you for salvaging this building and making it such a wonderful place for community programs. And I think it's such a wonderful thing for a historical program to be presented in a historical building. I don't think it gets much better than that. And this is the old Studebaker building on Studebaker Corner. And we are here tonight, so thank you and your church for taking this old building under your wing. Times Delta, of course, Tulare County Voices Planning, you saw the committee. Paul Hurley, amazing MC on these things. And Brian in the back here, he came up as part of the planning committee. This man is a technological wizard, and without his expertise there, this wouldn't be pulled off like it's going to be, hopefully this evening. But Brian deserves a lot of credit. And last but not least, last year, I left her off the thank you list. Oh my gosh, my wife. I left her off the thank you list, and she's the one that really should have been at the top of the thank you list. I'm not going to do that this year. My wife in the back is Larry. She is an amazing woman who does amazing things for me. We've been married for 53 years, and to neglect thanking her was a major sin on my part.
Terry,
Now-
I didn't initiate that applause for your forgetfulness, but for Larry. She deserves a lot more applause than that.
No,
by the way.
I noted that, Paul. I noted that. The other thing, I wasn't going to do this, but I thought because this is such a good-natured crowd, I'm going to highlight a couple of people in the audience here. The Switzers. Everybody know Carl and Louise Switzer? They're seated right over there. Carl and Louise are good friends of Larry and I and many of you. I was talking to Carl the other day, and it was kind of funny because I said, Carl, you're 94 years old. What's the best part of being 94? And he said, no peer pressure. And I thought... And Carl is just quick as a whip, isn't he? He's just quick. A little bit about housekeeping this evening. As we always do, when I get through kind of beating my gums up here, you're going to have a chance to make comments or questions, and then we hold that to the very end. so that it doesn't interfere with the continuity of the program. So if you think of a question as I'm talking, make a note someplace so you don't forget, and we'll ask it at the end. Are there any other questions about how the evening is going to go? I don't want you wondering about that, and we can answer it now if you have any questions. If none, I'm going to proceed. I have been exploring local history for over 35 years. I just did the math the other day, which is really amazing. I didn't think I was doing that stuff for that long. But for 35 years, I've been diving into Tulare County and Visalia history. And honestly, I've enjoyed every minute of it. It's been such a thrill, and it's an even bigger thrill for me to take the things that I discover in my journey and share them with people like you. And that's a real pleasure for me, because for me to hold those stories inside is selfish. These are great stories that deserve to be shared with lots of people, and you guys are the right audience for that. So thank you for that. When I've looked at the history of our county and community, especially the county, I've discovered our county is really what I've termed a land of superlatives. And what I mean by that is, when you think about the largest living thing, it's in Tulare County, the General Sherman, right? When you think about the largest lake, freshwater lake, west of the Great Lakes, it was in Tulare County. It's not here now, Tulare Lake. It's disappeared, of course. But we were home to the Tulare Lake. Valley oak trees, one of the largest species of oaks, is right here in our area, the valley oak tree. So we're really, and there are many more to include in that list. We are a land of superlatives, and tonight we're going to talk about another one. And we're going to talk about our involvement in the longest stage line in the world, the Butterfield stage. And that's the subject for tonight. And it's at this point that I'm going to take my seat. Now, before can everybody still see okay? Okay. Before I talk about the Butterfield, I want to give you a little context. And California became a state in 1850, right? We became the 31st state in 1850. And where was the seat of government in that year of 1850? It was way on the East Coast. And what was between them and California? A lot of open space, a lot of territory that belonged to the United States, but very few states. In fact, Texas, 1845, it became a state. It was pretty much the only state in that wide expanse of open country. And so the federal government said, we've got to somehow make California feel like they're part of us. They're way out in no man's land, isolated and feeling unloved. So they said, well, let's look at mail, for example. So they took a look at the mail and said, what can we do to improve the mail situation in this country? Now, keep in mind, in the 1850s, mail from the East Coast to the West Coast and vice versa, for the most part. Now, there were some primitive little stagecoach connections across the country. Not much, very reliable at least. Most of the mail during that decade of the 1850s went on steamship down to the Isthmus of Panama, went on a pack trip across the isthmus to the Pacific Ocean, again boarded another steamer, and then came up to San Francisco to drop the mail. Now that's the situation that we were facing in the 1850s, and you can see why the federal government said, somehow we got to fix that. That's one area that we think we can fix. So in 1857, the federal government put out a contract and said, look, we want somebody that's going to be able to build a stagecoach line from St. Louis, Missouri to San Francisco, California. That had never been done before. Pieces of it, but nothing as grandiose as almost a 3,000-mile route. And this had to go through land that most of which did not have a road or a path or a trail on before. So they were cutting some new territory. In fact, next slide, please. In 1857, John Butterfield got that contract, $600,000. His assignment was to build this nearly 3,000-mile road between St. Louis and San Francisco. Now, unbelievable task. He signed up for the contract, $600,000. Fortunately for us and for the country, he was an experienced stagecoach man out of New York. He was a New York entrepreneur who understood transportation issues. And so when he got that particular contract, he knew what to do. And you better know what to do, because the government says you got to do it within 1 year. You got to make it operational. I mean, can you imagine 1 year? There's hostility with the native people they've got to deal with. There's robbers along every area of the South where the route went. And you got to buy horses. You got to buy stagecoaches. You got to figure out how to cross rivers and all these things. And this guy took the challenge and made it happen. Next slide, please. He finished his contract 1858. Within 1 year of signing that contract, he had it done. And I want to point out here, if I can, this is the route that he designed and created. Here's St. Louis. Here's Tipton, Missouri, and he went all the way here up to San Francisco. Almost 3,000 miles. Some say 2,800, others say 2,900 miles. And he had to somehow make this work. And how do you do that with horses and coaches and giving them breaks? And by the way, he had to do it all within, the mail from St. Louis to San Francisco had to make it within 25 days. That was a big job, big task to tackle. But he was up to the challenge, and again, in 1858, he created what we call the Southern Route, which is the one I just pointed out. He had to create stations along the way, changing stations for the horses, rest areas for the drivers and passengers. And by the way, it was not only a mail route, he could also sell passenger seats on the coaches. And so you'll find out throughout the process that a lot of the passengers that passed through all the routes and all the stations were people that were heading to San Francisco or points in between. So it was a passenger stage as well. Along the way, he had 20 timetable stops. And what that meant was They were more elaborate than the changing stations. These were the stations that they published in the newspaper that you could set your watch by in theory. It's sort of like a timetable or a schedule for a bus. You look at the schedule and you know when the bus is going to be at certain points. 20 of those, 20 out of that 2,900 miles, only 20 were timetable stops. These were elaborate changing stations because they could also change horses, but they had hostlers that knew how to take care of passenger needs, feed passengers, feed stagecoach drivers. So these 20 timetable stops were critical. Next slide, please. Now, I told you St. Louis, Missouri is where it started. It actually didn't start in St. Louis. The train, which was already in place between St. Louis and a town called Tipton, Missouri, was already in place, and so they used that train to transport the mail from St. Louis to Tipton, Missouri, which is where the stage took over. So this is the plaque at Tipton, Missouri, which officially is the first stage stop on your way west. So that's Tipton, Missouri right there. In fact, we visited that in 2001. So that's me with the brown hair there. You see that? Next slide, please. Here are a list of the timetable stops. Notice the one in yellow. I don't know if you can read it, but it says Visalia, California. We were a timetable stop on that 2,900-mile route. I mean, we were published, our town's name was published everywhere because this was the published stations that you could board as a passenger, and you could also predict when the mail was going to arrive and leave. So, next slide, please. Now, the route oftentimes found existing roadways, especially on the more established areas on the east. There were lanes and there were paths that the Butterfield said, we're going to use those too. So they built them into the route. Some of them were as beautiful as you see here, going through shallow rivers over an existing path. Next slide, please. This is the Pinery. This is in the Guadalupe Mountains right outside of El Paso. The Pinery was the highest elevation station on the route. And it was nothing but a rock building. And that's all it was. And keep in mind, hostlers, and that's spelled H-O-S-T-L-E-R-S, not hustlers. Hostlers were the men hired to stay in these changing stations. And their job was to be prepared so when the stage came, they were ready to change the horses, give the driver a rest, maybe give him a quick meal, take care of any passenger needs. But that hostler was critical to this stage route, and there were 140 of those along that 2,900 mile. 140, 20 timetable stops. So those were the parts or the points where you could get rest, horses could get fed or changed or whatever. This one, we went to this one as well, and these are just ruins now, but this was a pretty tough duty spot right here for a hostler. I mean, it was a tough way to make a living. Next slide, please. Now, this man right here, a dapper-looking man, his name is Waterman Lilly Ormsby. Very famous man, and we're very lucky he was out there. This man was on the first trip that went from Tipton, Missouri. he rode all the way to San Francisco on the first westbound stage of the Butterfield. He happened to be a reporter for the New York Herald. His assignment was report on your trip. And so for 23 days and 23 and a half hours, he rode on that stage all the way to San Francisco. And Waterman Lily Ormsby did us such a great service by his trip on that stage. I mean, he documented some things that we would not have heard about had it not been for him on the stage. He boarded on September 15th, 1858 in Tipton, Missouri, and he came to Visalia on his route at 11:30 p.m. on October 8th, 1858, a little less than 3 weeks out. But he came to our town, and he described our town, that the town he saw on his visit. And he said it was about 500 people, which is pretty accurate, and it was in the midst of this huge oak forest. And that's accurate too. And he wrote that the town had a number of New Yorkers in the town. Apparently on his stopover, he was conversing with the group that had became the welcoming committee, so to speak. And so I'm sure they shared some New York stories. But more than stories, they shared a lager beer with him that was a New York brewed type of beer, and he was just so happy with that. And I think that's what got us some good press too, by the way. So he left, like within 30 minutes, he left from the time of his arrival. He had a chance to drink a beer, and he had a chance to talk to some people in the town, and had a chance to observe what was going on. What he wrote about us was the following. Next slide, please. And this is Visalia that he would have seen upon his arrival. This is 1863, but it was pretty much the same in 1858. And this is what he saw. His stage pulled up about right in that intersection, because that's the intersection of Main and Court Street, right there. On the far left side is the Billups Hotel, which was the first hotel in Visalia, and the stage pulled up there. And you're going to find later in the presentation that the Visalia marker is almost on that exact spot. On the right side of that photo was the Overland office. Again, timetable station, Overland office. They had a corral there. They had lots of extra wagons, coaches, and lots of extra horses right there. So next slide, please. This is what he wrote, and I'll read it to you so you don't have to squint. This is what he wrote about his visit. He said, "This was the first evidence of any enthusiasm along the route since leaving Fort Smith, and the rousing cheers they gave us as we left at 11:50 on Friday, October the 8th, ought to be remembered in the history of the town. So here I immortalize them." We gave him the best welcome that any of these towns did, except for Fort Smith, way back on the East Coast. And as he was leaving, and this was always a kick to me because I had heard about this for a long time. Anybody here hear of an Anvil salute? I can't see if you've okay, there's a couple of hands going up. This is what he says also as part of his upon leaving. He said, "Before we left, they gave us an anvil salute, which was quite new to me. The powder is placed in a hole in one anvil, and a train, which means a trail of powder to the edge. A card is then placed over the hole and another anvil on top of that. The reports, or the noise, were quite as loud as those of an 8-pounder. First of all, it tells me there was more than one anvil salute. And secondly, an 8-pounder is a cannon that fires an 8-pound ball. It's very loud, Civil War type of cannon that you would have seen. Now, when I first heard about anvil salutes, it wasn't here, it was on some other event. They were very popular in Tulare County, for sure, Visalia. And so I'm going to digress a little bit and give you a little lesson on anvil salutes, and I think you'll find it interesting. So next slide, please. That, in 2008, actually I organized for the Tulare County Historical Society a caravan to visit the Butterfield stage stations. Of course, none of them are there. They're all gone, but we went to the sites. And so at the end, as kind of our coup de grace, I guess you could say, I had a friend do an anvil salute for us, because I'd never seen one before and I had heard so much about them. This is how you set up an anvil salute. Everybody know what an anvil is? It's a blacksmith kind of thing. Heavy iron, you know, solid as can be, and you pound on it and you don't hurt it at all. Well, you put two anvils, one on top of the other, with a hollowed out part of one anvil with gunpowder in it. Then that trail of powder you light. Next slide, please. And the top anvil shoots straight up. And when we did our demonstration, the anvil, I think, did exactly what it was supposed to do. It went up, it turned in the air, and came down and clanged as it hit the other anvil that it was on top of. It was the most amazing thing I'd ever seen in my life. If ATF would have been there, we'd have all been arrested. I know, but it was done as part of our caravan, and now I have this picture of what an anvil salute is, and it was so worth it for me to be able to see that. And now you guys got to see it as well. Now, it was sort of the equivalent of a fireworks show. You know, if you're going to give everybody a good send-off and you want to really do something special, you want something pizzazzy. Well, this is the equivalent of a fireworks show. Okay, next slide, please. This, and you have a hard time seeing it, but this is basically the stations along the Butterfield between Los Angeles and San Francisco, and Tulare County is the middle of that whole line of stations that you see there. The stations in Tulare County, which is what I'm going to go over now, actually began in what is now Kern County. Fort Tejon was a station stop. It was actually a timetable stop. But when you came down Grapevine Canyon and hit the valley floor, you were in Tulare County in 1858. Kern County didn't exist until 1866. So when I count the Tulare County stations, I count the ones that are now in Kern County. And the first one is Rose Station. I found this photo in something. And it wasn't a book, it was like a snapshot in a photo album. These photos are so rare. Photos of these stage stops are so rare that I just jumped up and down when I got that photo, because it authenticated itself by saying barn at Rose Station. Now, no one would write that if it wasn't really what it was. So I'm taking this to the bank. That little building in front, is probably the stage station. The barn in the back is probably a later add-on. But these were very, very primitive. I mean, these were not luxurious swimming pool type places. These were rough frontier places. And Rose Station, I bet you I have the only photo of Rose Station. I believe that to be the case because they're so rare. Next slide, please. On our caravan, I mentioned the caravan where we did the anvil salute at the very end. We went to one of the stations in actually this one is still in Kern County, but it was a beautiful spot. This is Mountain House Station or Willow Springs. It's right on the border of Kern and Tulare County in the foothills, and you can see the foothills there. These stage stations were placed in places that had grass when possible and had water. So you can see why springs were picked frequently to be stage stops. And this one still has a running spring in it. And you can see the green grass and you can see the foothills in the background. And I was just so amazed at that station because we had permission from the owner of that property. It was such a beautiful, beautiful spot. Winding road. It had to be the stage road still. Winding road between these foothills, and it would wind up next to the spring, and I'll show you the spring in just a second. But we had everybody imagine what it must have been like to be a hostler stationed at Willow Springs, out in the middle of nowhere, quiet as can be, beautiful country. But if you're lonely, this is a place that you're going to really be lonely. And you know, if you close your eyes and you picture this, the stage drivers yelling at their teams as they're approaching the station, and you can hear the rumbling of the stagecoach, and then the stage driver, when they approach their stage changing station, they had to sound their horn. To what? For what reason? To alert the hostler, who's probably sleeping, that you're coming and you better have the next horses ready to go. And so you can picture this whole scene of isolation with this rumbling noise and this horn, and all at once the stage comes up and there's this whole, it's sort of like a pit stop in a race, you know, all this activity's going on because he's under the gun. Time-wise, he's got to make the trip within 25 days. And so every one of these stage stops has to be right on target. And again, the horn is what was one of those extra alerts to the hostler that you're coming and you're ready to have everything in place. Next stage stop. Oh, this is the actual spring that's still there. It's still used to feed his cattle who graze on this land. The next stop after this was Fountain Springs. Fountain Springs is north of this one. It's the next one, and this is actually in Tulare County, the Fountain Springs one. You can still see the marker at Fountain Springs. There's only one building there. It's a restaurant today. But next slide, please. Then you drop down out of the foothills of Fountain Springs, and you're going now to Tule River, which is where Porterville is now. And you're dropping down again on the valley floor. You're taking what we call Highway 65 today. 65 is such a historic route in Tulare County. It was an Indian trail early on. It was the Los Angeles Stockton Road in the 1850. it was Fremont's trail in 1847. I think it was his first expedition here. But that Highway 65, what a historic route. And it became then the Butterfield stage line too for its trip north. And so this is the marker that Lindsay has right at the big curve there on 65 as you're heading toward Tulare. This marker is right there. They didn't have a stage stop, but they acknowledged basically that they were on the route of the Butterfield. Next slide, please. Now we're in Visalia. The stage when it came to Visalia would come in South Court Street, would come in right down Court Street, and Court Street was in existence in 1858. So it'd come in Court Street and plop right in the intersection of Court and Main, the one I showed you with the old photograph. And that was the timetable stop for Visalia. And here's the marker that's in the 100 block of East Main Street here in Visalia. Anybody see it? Everybody see it actually on the street? Anybody? Yeah, how come everyone doesn't see it? It's right there for all of us to see, but it's been there since 1973 and it's become a fixture on the street. And so people just overlook it. But there it is. That commemorates the stop for the timetable stop for Visalia. Next slide, please. That's a close-up of the same marker. That was put up by Eclampus Vitus out of actually Fresno when they had jurisdiction over our area. But they're up in Fresno now, and we have our own local chapter down here. Next slide, please. This is what the stage stop in San Francisco looked like when they got there. This is actually an eastbound stage leaving San Francisco to head to St. Louis. So keep in mind, there were 2 weekly trips westbound, 2 weekly trips eastbound. And so these stagecoaches, as they went over the same route, they would pass each other. And in some cases, the drivers would just switch, and they would kind of work out a system of just kind of switching their routes a little bit. But they were able to do that as long as they kept on schedule. They could do those kinds of things. Next slide, please. What did the stagecoaches look like? I mean, they were stagecoaches. Keep in mind, stagecoaches. There are many, many varieties of stagecoaches. There basically were only 2 varieties on the Butterfield route. And this is the first one. In 2010, Wells Fargo Bank brought their Concord coach to Visalia to give rides, and it was part of a publicity thing for the bank. This is the Cadillac of coaches right here. This is the Cadillac, the best you're going to get. And you'll notice the cab of that, and you can't really tell on this picture, but the cab of that is sitting on oxen leather straps. And what does that do? It acts as a shock absorber or springs. So that cab would move like this with rocky ground or rough ground would move, and it was the most comfortable you were going to get on a stagecoach. This would hold anywhere from 6 people to 12 people if you wanted to hang some from the top, and they did periodically. Cadillac right here. Next slide, please. This is called a celerity wagon, or a better term is a mud wagon. Not all of the route was nice and smooth. Some of it was through lots of water, through lots of mud, and if it did, you went into one of these. The drivers switched it out, got rid of the Concorde, and they put this coach in. it was better able to handle tough terrain. And again, called the mud wagon, but they were. I gave a presentation to a group one time here in town, and I said we had Concord coaches, and there was a guy in the audience that was from down south, and he said, "No, you didn't have Concord coaches." I said, "Oh, tell me more." And he said, "You had mud wagons." And I said, "Yeah, I know we had mud wagons, but I think we had Concord coaches too." And he said, "I don't think so." Well, I went back to my file, and we had Concord coaches. And we had Concord coaches and mud wagons. But it depended upon the time of the year, too. And you can see that. If you're dealing with wet, marshy, mucky soil, you want a mud wagon that's able to get through easier than that delicate, nimble Concord coach. Next slide, please. Big deal. Concord, let me back up. Butterfield stage lasted 2.5 years. Started in 1858, ended in 1861. Now, they went to a lot of trouble for 2.5 years worth of mail delivery, didn't they? Well, it wasn't by design. It ended in 1861 because the Texan Confederacy down south was commandeering these stagecoaches. And so it couldn't make it through because they passed through Texas and they'd commandeer the coach and take it off the line and never made it to the end of the route. So the Civil War basically, and some native tribe hostilities also, but mainly it was the Civil War that really stopped the southern route of the Butterfield, which is what we were on. But yet in that 2.5 years, it made such an impact on people. Next slide, please. The Times Delta, the first newspaper in southern Tulare County, or southern San Joaquin County, was called the Tulare Record and Fresno Examiner. June of 1859, this first page of that newspaper hit the hands of the reader right here. First page. Notice up the upper center of that masthead. Next slide, please. They used the Butterfield stage as their symbol for their masthead. That tells you that they thought that Butterfield was a pretty big thing. That was a pretty big deal. And that says San Francisco, I think 240 miles. But that was part of the masthead of Visalia's first newspaper. Next slide, please. In 1958, the U.S. Postal Service created the Butterfield stamp as a centennial celebration for the Butterfield stage. So again, it made it on U.S. postage stamps. Next slide. 1952, Visalia celebrated. Can you still hear me? 1952, that's better. 1952, Visalia celebrated its centennial. You know, we were founded in 1852, so 1952 they did a centennial. And they did, this is a big deal. In town, everybody got involved. J. Thomas Crow, the man on the left, dressed up like Ormsby, played a reenactment part. Annie Mitchell at the microphone. Annie R. Mitchell, our historian, was there as part of that reenactment. Rufus Connolly, the guy to her right, who was the postmaster, played his part in the reenactment. This was a big deal to this community in 1952. So it needs to be elevated because it was a big deal for many, many years. Next slide, please. First day covers. Notice the Anvil Salute. The Anvil Salute made it to that first day cover, and that was in celebration again of the centennial of the Butterfield. Next slide, please. The the Butterfield lasted 2.5 years, not very long. But you know what? When you think about it and you kind of look at the next few slides, you're going to see it really wasn't destined to last very long anyway. Because there were some things that were going to happen that really made it relatively useless. Next slide, please. Telegraph came here in 1860, Visalia in 1860. So all at once, communication was kind of entering into this whole technology scene, and this is where I discovered that we had both the Butterfield or the Concord coaches and the mud wagons, is because when we celebrated the arrival right here at that same intersection of Court and Main Street, when we celebrated the arrival of the telegraph, the Butterfield stage was the biggest element in that celebration. They brought out all their Concord coaches, all their mud wagons that were here in Visalia. Well, that was my smoking gun evidence that we had mud wagons and we had Concord coaches. But again, telegraph was making its impact already in 1860. Next slide, please. Pony Express. 10 days across Missouri to California, they could deliver the mail. So all at once, and that was 1860 to 61. They were only in business 18 months. They went bankrupt. But again, the transportation and the communication technology was kind of coming forward here. Next slide, please. Transcontinental Railroad, 1869 is when it made it to California. Now, can you see what's happening here? You can see that the Butterfield really wasn't destined to be around all that much anyway. And of course, 1869, the Transcontinental Railroad came to California. 1872, Tulare County had the first train coming into the county. And in 1875, Visalia had the first train coming into Visalia. And we're only talking about 10 or 15 years after the Butterfield. So you can see what was happening with the technology. Next slide, please. Yeah, that's 1875, Visalia Railroad Company coming into Visalia. Next slide, please. Okay, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Just quickly, there are so many other elements that go with the Butterfield. Stage robberies, stage accidents, VIPs that came through Visalia and Tulare County on the stage, famous drivers of the stage. We had some super drivers. Newspapers were brought in by stage and dropped off at the local newspaper office, and they would take those newspapers with exchange agreements with other city newspapers, and they would share stories. So many subtopics under the Butterfield that you could really talk about that 2.5 year of Butterfield experience. You could spend a lot of time talking about different elements there. But with that, I'm going to stop and give you a chance. If you have any questions at all, I'd be happy to try and answer them.
Terry,
I'm just a kind of a hacker when it comes to history, but I try and know my stuff. So give me a chance, and if I don't know, I'll tell you.
Terry, I'll start with the first question. If you could back up that slide one, I heard murmuring in the crowd when that was up, and I suspect it was because people were trying to guess where that is. Is that the depot in that slide?
Are you talking this slide here?
Correct.
Yeah, that is right where the Depot restaurant is now, but the previous Depot, wooden two-story structure behind it. You can see the cupola of the courthouse in the background. So we know exactly where that is. That's on Oak Street near Church, right where the Depot restaurant is now. Any
Very good. Okay, this is the time when you get to ask your questions. We got a microphone
I've got a question here.
roaming around. If you want to ask a question, please raise your hand so we can get to you.
If you can elaborate more on that Hostler stationing, because I'm trying to visualize the transportation from St. Louis to Frisco. Are you saying that they slept on the stage? It was a continuous route, that there was no place that they would stop and spend the night?
No, you slept on the stage. Yeah, the drivers were exchanged. Passengers slept on the stage. Ormsby slept on the stage. He didn't go back by stage, by the way. There's a message there. This was not something you wanted to do as a fun experience. Yes, ma'am.
Please wait for, just
Oh.
a little housekeeping thing. Could you please wait till we get the microphone to you before you ask your question so everybody can hear? Sir, you got it.
Hi, I was just kind of curious as to how many people generally went on one trip from the East Coast to West Coast, and do you happen to know how much it costs to take the trip?
Yeah, when it first started, it was $200 would get you from St. Louis to San Francisco. Yeah, and not many people went the entire route. They would stop off at different points along the way. But yeah, and Ormsby is kind of the exception. He did it as part of his job as a reporter. Yeah.
Are you saying they drove horses at night?
Yes.
How did they do that with no light?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know how you would do that. I mean, it's not like you've got well maintained roads. And look at the is there any way to turn that one light off? That okay. Yeah, I mean, it's if you're in an open area and you know the country well, you could probably do it. But if you were at Mountain House, Willow Springs, Fountain Springs, boy, I don't know, that was dangerous. But those stage drivers were a different breed. They were a different breed, and I don't know if they had lanterns. I never saw a picture with lanterns on it, but they had to do it some way. And they did it because they were under the gun, time-wise, And that's why they'd eat on the go a lot, and I mean, it was a high-pressure job. Those people had to really, really do a number on it.
From what I understand, they often hired people who knew the area, and the driver would only drive a particular section because that was an area that he was familiar with. But I do have a question. Was there any record of people who got on and off?
There may be. I've not found it. I wanted to find it.
Well, I was going to say, from what I heard, there was one record that's in the Smithsonian was the only one that person knew about.
Yeah, I've never seen one. My best record for who was on the Stagecoach was when we got our first newspaper in 1859, and that was news to them. Who was on the stage was news, and they would sometimes report it. Not always, but I looked for every time they reported somebody on the stage. There's even a story that John C. Fremont was on one of the stages through Visalia in his later years. I've not been able to verify that where I'm comfortable with it, but if that's true, I mean, he's going to travel on country he traveled through when he did his first Fremont Trail. And so, I mean, I would love to be able to verify it. The newspaper is my only source of verifying occupants on the stage. Yeah.
Question over there.
Was this a year-round thing, or was this just seasonal?
Year-round. In fact, that's why the southern route was picked for obvious reasons. I mean, St. Louis, San Francisco, the direct route would be like this, but what's the problem with that? You got the Rocky Mountains. So you got snow, you got high peaks, so they eliminated that by going south. And the idea was to make it a 24/7 all year long thing. Yeah. But I'm sure that, I mean, when you got torrential rains coming down from time to time and the mud and the sand, can you imagine going through the desert with sand this deep? I mean, there were so many obstacles that only the strong survived, I think, because it was tough business.
Terry, for the drivers, do you know how long or what distance they would drive? And was there more than one on a coach at a time?
Yeah, none of them would drive the entire distance, obviously. They would drive to a point, and then there was some arrangement they had where the same driver went this way and would get off and go this way. So I never was able to work that out, but I'm sure they had a system. And they didn't, I think 60 miles is what I recall, that each driver would actually drive their coach 60 miles. And that seemed to make sense to me at the time. But I think it depends on which 60 miles, too. Yeah, if you're in Arkansas in the summer, 60 miles might be easy. But 60 miles through Fort Yuma down in Southern California might be harder, you know. Or the Pinery, you know, going over the Guadalupe Mountains. Others.
Terry?
Yes.
First of all, just a quick observation.
Please hold the mic up to your mouth so we can hear you.
Talking about whether they ran at night. The passage you read from the newspaper reporter said that they pulled into Visalia at 11:30 p.m.
That's true.
Yeah, they were running at night.
That's true. Yeah, 11:30, and they were leaving at 11:30.
And
so that, I think, answers our question about whether they were driving at night.
The other one is, my family moved here in late spring of 1970. So
1970?
1970. So either in 1970 or 71, I clearly remember going to the 4th of July show at Mineral King Bowl, and they did an anvil salute.
Is that right? Shows. Oh, yeah. Well, they did one in the 1952 reenactment of the city centennial. They did an anvil salute. So I had to know what it was. I just couldn't stand it any longer.
Other questions, again, please raise your hands. We got one here.
I don't have a question, but I looked up $200 in 1850 is the equivalent of $8,093 today.
Yeah, they call that business class.
Other questions? Raise your hand. We got one.
Have one here.
Newell, okay, Newell, give me a chance to get to you. There's a reason I got this stick in my hand. And it isn't for affectation.
Yeah, I just had two quick questions. The first of all, how did Butterfield do financially as far as the enterprise of Butterfield? And then what other enterprises was he involved in?
I think, and I don't know. I've not researched John Butterfield all that much, but I know that he was an entrepreneur and had done well before the Butterfield experience. When this shut down, when the Butterfield shut down on the southern route, and we stopped being a timetable stop, in May of 1861, and this is like a month after the route was shut down, in May of 1861, 40 Butterfield stage employees came into Visalia and picked up all the extra horses, all the extra coaches, all the extra equipment, loaded it onto those wagons, and went off into Salt Lake City. They created the northern route. Now, I don't know how that northern route crossed the Rocky Mountains, but there was a Butterfield northern route, so it continued after the southern route. So I don't know how that answers your question, Newell, but I think he did fine.
I have an answer.
Oh.
Yeah, John Butterfield was also a co-founder and investor in 2 other enterprises that continue to exist today that maybe you've heard of.
American Express?
American Express is one.
Yeah.
And the other one, of course, is Wells Fargo.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Yeah, we don't have to feel too sorry for him, I don't think.
Other questions,
Okay.
please. Anybody else? Here we go.
Hold on.
You mentioned that the stage would come down Court Street, I believe.
Yep.
But the marker's on Main Street, so trying to coordinate it's
Court and Main.
Court and Main. Okay.
Yeah.
So it would come from the south, heading north on Locust, or I mean, Court.
Yeah, come south, stop at the stage station right there at Court and Main Street. When it would leave, it would go west on Main Street. How far, I don't know, but eventually it would jog over to take what I consider today to be West Goshen Avenue. Because from Visalia, it headed out toward Cross Creek Station, which is about where the Kings County line is now, west of Traver. And then it would go to Kingston, which is a ghost town now, but it's by Layton. And then it would head up the valley up to into Fresno County, Pacheco Pass, cross over, Gilroy, and then up the peninsula to San Francisco. And that's the route it would take. Yeah.
We still have lots of time to wear Terry Ommen out with questions here, if you have any more.
We can auction off my
You're going to part with that precious artifact?
See, another thing my wife did for me. She went to Party Work, whatever it was called, for 50 cents. She got this horn for me. I mean, how many wives would do that?
I doubt that story. That's how few wives there are to do that. Really, we have no other questions? We're going to break early tonight? Here we go, right here.
Hold on.
It's coming.
Hi. I was raised in Corona, California, and just outside of Corona is Temescal Road, where there was a Butterfield stagecoach stop.
Oh.
And that was also known as the Riverside stop. But I was just curious how that would have connected with the route that you described.
Well, El Monte is in the Los Angeles area. It was one of the stops. Los Angeles was one of the stops. I don't know about one you described in the Riverside area. I know it came in at Fort Yuma, down where Yuma, Arizona is today. It would come in there and then come up, and I probably have a list someplace of the stops along the way, but I don't remember that one.
Yeah.
We have somebody here volunteered. Temecula?
Yeah,
Maybe? No?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Well,
I'm sorry, I missed that.
Warner's Ranch.
Oh, Warner's Ranch is one.
Temecula
Yep.
to Los Angeles.
Yeah, Warner's Ranch is one that's is still recognized as one of the kind of a touristy place for now, isn't it?
No, it's a historical reenactment with furniture and that type of thing of the era.
Yeah, but I mean that's a well-known Butterfield stop right there. Absolutely. Yeah.
Several
Pete.
years ago, I was on a desert camping trip with Lee Goldstein that lived on South Fork Road in Three Rivers. And we camped in a dry arroyo somewhere down in the Anzo Borrego area, and on the U.S. Forest Service map, it showed we were right on the Butterfield stage route through the desert, which I thought was cool. No one else knew what it was.
Yeah. Well, I got an email. Let me interrupt 1 second. I got an email from a guy I used to work with at the Visalia PD, and he shared with me something I had forgotten. He came from Arkansas to California, and his family property was part of a Butterfield stop. So it's amazing. I mean, when you think about it, you got 130, 140 changing stations over that 2,900 miles. You're going to touch a lot of people and come up with some history for a lot of people. And that was one that, out of the blue, he said, yeah, I bought the property back, and it used to be a Butterfield stage stop. They're everywhere.
I have a question. Are any of these trails or roads labeled so that if we wanted to go off-road, we could recognize them?
I think there's a map.
Are they labeled on the road?
Well, I think, I don't think I've ever seen any.
Haven't either.
I think you've got to be specifically looking for them, and then you've got to go from marker to marker to marker and create your own trail. I think, unless these maps show something here, and I don't think they do. But they call it the Butterfield Trail. So there might be some designation. I don't know. I've never seen one. We don't have any in Tulare County. You just have to go from basically to marker, and we have a lot of them. Porterville's got a marker for their stage stop. Fountain Springs has a marker. Visalia has a marker. Lindsay has a marker. I think even Kingston has a marker, or where the Kingston site is, by Layton there. But I don't think there's any street signs or road signs that indicate it.
Remember that the Butterfield Overland stage route that went through Visalia ended in 1861. But other overland stage routes continued. Not the southern route because of the Civil War, but others didn't. And the actual Butterfield Overland stage fully did not cease operations until 1869, mostly because of the railroad.
Yeah, and then I think that was because they continued with the northern route, I think.
Yeah, on the northern route and through Nevada.
But keep in mind, this is what confuses people, I think, a lot. Or people think, oh, our property was on the stage route too. Well, we had lots of stage routes. I mean, the Butterfield wasn't the only stage. I mean, we had stages in Visalia to Three Rivers, Visalia to Hornitos, Visalia to Millwood, lots of different stage routes, but they're not all Butterfield stages. In fact, very few of them are. So it's easy to get Butterfield and stages confused because they can be two separate things.
I have a quick question. When we did this brochure, or partnered with this group that put this brochure on, he mentioned at the time that they were going to put together a reenactment of the Butterfield stage. Have you or anyone else heard of that happening?
Uh-uh. No, in fact, our historical society got wind that Fresno was going to do something, but I called up there and I could find no one that was doing anything. There was talk of doing something, but no one ever really did. We had a wonderful, and I mentioned it during my talk in I think was it 08? Yeah, it must have been 2008, where we did the caravan. I'm telling you, I tackled this thing and I should have been shot. It was like the impossible thing to do. We met in Tipton, and everybody brought their car, and we lined up 30 cars, and we began the tour of the Butterfield route. Well, you can't keep 30 cars together. That's impossible. We had, at the last car, we had a friend of mine who had a pickup. He carried a porta potty on a trailer. I mean, this was a sight to behold, I'm telling you. Because when we got to Willow Springs and nature called, what do you do? So we brought the porta potty with us. But I mean, it was so much fun, but it was so scary looking back. Because not only did we have the anvil salute issue that could have ended up with shrapnel everywhere, but we had all these cars going in all different directions trying to figure out where do I go? I'm lost. And oh my gosh, it was fun, but it turned out to have lots of problems. And we had lots of officials from the state on our caravan with us because it was a big deal. And one of the vice presidents from Wells Fargo was on. She rode with me. Her name was Babel, I think it was. But she gave me a bunch of stuff out of their files because she knew my interest in it. And they're the big historians for the Butterfield right now, I think.
We got about 4 minutes left, so this might have to be the last question. But if you do have another question, raise your hand now. Don't wait until I'm going to say, well, thank you very much. Go ahead.
Terry, on that route, there was obviously a lot of rivers and creeks to cross, and probably at times there was a lot of water in there. Did they have barges to cross, or how did they get across those?
They looked for fording spots, where they could cross by fording a river. They looked for those. They built bridges. In some cases, they built bridges. In some cases, they looked for ferry crossings. Firebaugh Ferry in Fresno County was one of the stations, and I'm sure they used the ferry there to cross their water there. Yeah. Was Kingston a ferry too? Yeah. I think Kingston was called something else. Whitmore Ferry, that's right. You're right. Thank you.
Should have another chair for you up there. Okay, go ahead.
What was the pay for the drivers? Do you know?
I don't know.
What the drivers get paid?
Not enough. I don't know that.
Less than the horses. How about that?
Okay.
Any others? All right.
Thank you again, folks.
Terrific. Let's give Terry a nice round of applause. Once again, Captain Terry Open.
What do you give me? Wait a second. What do you give me?
Fabulous prizes. The nice round of applause. Let's give him another one. What the heck? Thanks, Terry. Thank you so much. That was so great that I can't wait till next year, and there will be a next year. Hey, on behalf of everybody at Tulare County Voices, Pastor Dan Birchfield, First Presbyterian Church Congregation, myself, my friends, my family. Well, I don't have any friends. My family. I want to wish you all a very Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. Thank you and good night.